Welcome. In this video, you will learn about what is trauma, our relationship with it, how our old models of dealing with trauma is malfunctioning, and tips on how to peel it away from our life. Often people stigmatize the word trauma, think it's something horrific, or deny that they have it. However, try substituting the word trauma for these: hurt, frozen, uncomfortable moment, unwanted memory, painful impression, obsession or addiction, dysfunctional attachment, uncontrollable desire, overwhelming emotion or thought, cultural judgments, and so on. Basically, something unresolved that gets stuck. Here is something provocative. I concluded after studying the peak states psychobiology model of what trauma is that 90+% of our human interaction and choices are based on something unknown or unconscious that drives us. Basically, most of our choices or decisions are motivated by our pain body, therefore trauma-based. From a therapy perspective, we lose parts of ourselves or fragment and disassociate when shock, death, sudden accidents or suffering occurs. So when we lose a piece of ourselves, the law of physics kicks in and something has to fill that emptiness or gap. What normally fills it is of a nature or frequency similar to what initially caused the shock and damage. Some call this a pain body or void. And suddenly we have this pain body in us that we start to identify ourselves with. And because this new fragment we associate ourselves with is of more intense energy, it is often noticed during heightened state of being, such as deep intimacy, emotional trigger, or shock. I often think that we are unaware of our pain body taking over and becoming the guiding part of our decision making and choices. It converts into somewhat of an inner compass and stays with us non-stop. Suddenly we are drawn to particular people, place, or circumstances because they feel familiar to us. And sadly, this is often how we re-experience and repeat the past and re-traumatize ourselves. That's why some victims will experience abuse again and again, often because they have never experienced safety, basically reliving the past again and again. It has been documented in animals and humans that if we experience displacement from families, feel unsafe, experience abuse, or are emotionally neglected during upbringing, and the pain is all we know, we are more likely to end in addictive behavior or abusive situations compared to those who had a safe, nurturing, and caring start. Gabor Mate says it's not what happens to us, it is what happens inside of us as a reaction, how we internalize or interpret things. But then the question arises, do we all have trauma? I mean, how does a person know that they have trauma? Well, chances are we may not even know. And I know my next statement is extremely challenging, but since the new fragment or pain body often takes over our identifying needs and wants, we may actually not live our own lives. Isn't that terrifying and fascinating at the same time? And therefore parasitic or symbiotic might be the relationship that trauma has with us. But let's go even further. We also know that trauma often blanks out or hides itself from conscious awareness and creates memory lapses. The memory blanks those painful events because the system is overloaded or spaced out. And this is why we push the hurtful experiences to the background, as they are just too much to deal with. Thus we store these abysses in the background of our awareness for later to deal with when we feel safer, when we have recovered and have more resources. This is how we survive. We compartmentalize. Through brain scans, we can see the frontal lobe of brain and its connection to amygdala is often malfunctioning in trauma. In post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, the amygdala is hyperactive and prefrontal lobe is hypoactive. So let's take that apart. In normal non-trauma states, the frontal lobe is active, ruling movement, language, executive functions, personality, learning process, problem solving, and conscious attention. But when amygdala, which rules memories, impulses, sexuality, computes five senses, is overactive and the frontal lobe is passive, we function differently. Amygdala, the brain threat detector, takes over, and frontal brain going offline means we have intrusive memories, avoidance behaviors, hyperarousal. And all these can develop into fight or flight or freeze response, which is just another way to define trauma or PTSD. That's why people often relive or actually live in past, because they can't seem to be able to inhabit the part of their brain governing here and now. The present is shut down and inaccessible. Therefore, when we encounter the trigger, we immediately resurrect our association with it. And it usually doesn't make sense when we see others spiraling into pain after a casual event, but they have encountered their trigger. Although we all know that they are fine right now, they don't get it because they don't live in a present moment. For instance, a shocking example. One of my clients told me that she never stops thinking of being raped. Every time she opens her door and goes out, she thinks and sees the association with rape everywhere. Even in her dreams she is raped. And thus even in the safety of her house, she constantly thinks of danger. Or a client who has been bullied about her voluptuous body. She literally starves herself and frequently passes out at work or on a street and loses consciousness as barely any nutrition in her body. These examples differ in severity and intensity, but whatever your trauma is, we all have a pain body taking over our system. Thus, the way forward is to make a decision and plan to change our symbiotic relationship with the pain body. To gain the awareness often requires experiencing quite a few cycles of the painful pattern. After a certain amount of suffering and denial, we finally become aware of our pain body. Then we have to work with layers. It is like peeling onion. We cry, and after some time, we open another layer of our deep self. We are fortunate to live in times where we developed many ways to process the trauma, and new ways are being discovered as we speak. But pharmaceuticals aren't one of them, as psychiatric world already knows, at least since Body Keeps the Score was published in 2014. So these are some of the systems or therapies you may want to use to deal with trauma. Peak States Institute therapy, Bhakti or Karma Yoga, EMDR, holotropic breathwork, Brandon-based journeying, TRE, community and group therapy, DNRS, acupuncture, hypnotherapy, craniosacral therapy, NLP, 12 steps, family constellations and ancestral therapy, EFT, Neigong, somatic therapy, psychedelics with integration, and possibly talk therapies like CBT. Some of these systems work better than others, and some only meet a trauma at the door and don't release it fully. I have a separate video where I deconstruct how each of these therapies work. A side note, which may sound rather strange. Quite often the pain body tries to hide, not wanting to be discovered. Almost like it has its own anti-discovery system. Funny, right? To prevent a therapist or client from finding it. It will employ guilt, shame, embarrassment, blind spots, what-ifs, and many types of denial or spiritual bypass. Not always, but often, because we are so used to the symbiotic relationship we have with pain body, it often suits us to have it. For instance, an orphan that becomes a successful CEO using the drive of their pain body of not having connection or family, thus creating powerful and strong business with many depending employees. Their lack of not having pushes them into what we call positive trauma of having some security and admiration they didn't have. But this isn't sustainable in long term, as they are not getting all their needs fulfilled. But something is better than nothing. We all react differently to trauma, and some of us might never be aware or discover that we have it. Here is something interesting. When it comes to counseling and psychotherapy, you may end up in talking therapy for 10 plus years and nothing will really change, as the subconscious doesn't always speak to conscious awareness. And reviewing past skeletons in closet might not really lead to actually taking them out. Ram Dass provocatively pointed out that common talking therapy is like rearranging your prison cell. The danger is the longer you just talk, the longer you might stay in woundology, and you might even get sympathy for your pain from others, and therefore positive feedback loop for trauma, and then it will be very hard to step out from this parasitic and symbiotic relationship with wounds. But say you do have enough resources, go to a talking therapy, set yourself a target of maximum 6 months to share and verbalize your past, gain an awareness of your pain body, but be aware this is not how you release your pain, issues, and trauma. So go to talking therapies for framing of your pain body, what exactly triggers you, how, when, and so on. This will allow for increase of space between the trigger and reactivity, and although that isn't a healing, this alongside empathy is the most useful thing that talking therapies or CBT can do at the start of the healing process. So what is the end of therapy then? Well, definitely not resurrecting what happened to you 15 years ago. Once you do heal and pull out trauma by the root, you don't totally recall every time you encounter the trigger. This is a crucially important point. Not all therapies can fully release trauma. Most of them just increase the gap between trigger and reaction, or subdue reaction, not helping you living full potential. Here are a few tips for therapy. Be careful about trauma hunting. Instead, refer to my video where I take apart how different trauma therapies work. If or when you do notice your pattern of trauma, research into it carefully and with compassion. Make a simple strategic plan on how to deal with it. Be aware of fragility of mind. Some statements, especially from those who we open our heart, trust, and look up to, might land too deep in our subconscious mind, working like a spell. Caroline Myss, in her Archetypal Ideas of Sacred Contracts, mentions that often when we incarnate, we choose to learn certain lessons. And how would we learn about personal power if we first do not lose it or not have it in the first place? She also logically implies that certain lessons are taught by our friends, but for certain lessons, people need to come to our life who aren't friends, who teach us difficult, disempowering lessons from abusive and survival perspective. For instance, she mentions shadow behavior of archetypes who often disrupt and cause unpredictable abuse, and when we encounter them, we don't have a choice. We have to realize our power or we won't survive. She used the work of Carl Jung of archetypes and explains that we need to learn how to overcome our 4 survival archetypes of child, prostitute, victim, and saboteur. We all have these in us and their tendencies in a shadow and positive sense. They teach us that unless we learn the lesson and turn shadow into symbolic light, we will never thrive, because we will always sell or compromise our power for love, protection, safety, or acceptance. Caroline's work is essential in being able to verbalize and understand human power, which is as well a beginning and as well as essence of therapy and any inner work. One thing you need to be careful about in therapy is how you identify, perceive, or label yourself. Language has a huge empowering potential, and equally it allows us to succumb to limiting beliefs. It can stick deeply and too far into your subconscious mind and is very hard to get past it, especially if you attribute a lot of value to people or philosophies that give you these labels. Calling yourself victim and whatever label you get or give yourself might not be useful. Better to reframe and remodel everything to your highest potential. If you identify yourself as forever wounded, you will never be healed. You are just someone who is perpetually recovering. Let's not forget that most of the therapists quite possibly were wounded themselves. And that isn't a bad thing, as that creates knowledge and compassion. But be also aware that some therapists' motivation might be to keep you in therapy. However unsettling that is, keep that in mind when choosing a therapist, but hopefully that will never happen to you. So what would be the best nickname you can give yourself and aim on what you really want and supports your highest potential? NLP founder Bandler said, if your therapy system is interested too much in why things happen to you and not as much what the current issue is and how to create compelling present and future, you know that you aren't in a good hands. Thank God lobotomy is no longer being used. But I think there is still something wrong with our model of therapy if we still need electric shocks and numbing medications or labels of forever pathologies. I mean, did you know that electric shocks are still being used in UK hospitals? And did you know benzos and SSRIs shrink and age the brain, and link has been found to these medications causing more severe dementia, increase in fractures, increase in all-cause mortality, and increase in cognitive decline. Also, they are extremely addictive and it's very hard to get off them, and in many cases increase suicide risk. And yes, of course, some of these pills might be a lifesaver and numb and therefore reduce psychosis, but equally mercury or rat poison in small doses would probably do the same. As these medications numb emotional responses and often crumble relationships, as people under their influence literally reduce their emotional capacity and functioning to a minimum, and they are just in survival mode. Richard Bandler, the NLP genius, said that psychiatric medications are like chemical lobotomy. One would think that by now we put one and one together and understand, same like in sugar and tobacco industry, that medical science might have been captured by profit rather than interest in health. If we continue believing outdated ideas of mental health issues and trauma being caused by chemical imbalances and not dynamic interplay of biological, psychological, and social factors, then we are just like dolls or puppets in melodramatic comedy or rather tragedy of industry's sale of chemicals. Psychiatrists then being mere dispensaries of pills. The so-called poison solution, pill solution, which before used to be tobacco, sugar, or any other product. So are we just consumers then? Yes, according to Darwin's model, that is as far as our evolution probably feels comfortable to go. Well, I think we need better models of understanding of self, like Peak States Research Institute had discovered, or as old models of self or soul in Eastern spirituality are suggesting. These models tells us that we are in pain and struggle because we are spiritual beings identifying ourselves with matter. I know this may be a stretch for some of us, and no, I am not suggesting to transcend or bypass our trauma and suddenly become enlightened. I am suggesting to keep the goal and aim in mind of these models so we reshape, learn new models, and get inspirations on how to deal with trauma. Previously, I mentioned that we get trauma because part of us ruptures or fragments and pain body takes over. But then if some of us are not aware of our trauma, there must be and are obviously others who don't get traumatized at all. I mean, all of us will react differently to potential traumatic or abusive situation. So are some of us superhumans, or what is going on? This is extremely fascinating topic because Institute for the Study of Peak States in their psychobiology research has discovered that this is exactly the case. Some of us have more potential to be in what they call peak states. Such people don't absorb the trauma or are immune to it, almost like they have a potential to be always happy and euphoric. That doesn't mean they won't have emotional reaction in distress, but they are simply not affected. A part of engaging in many trauma therapies, we also need to invest into intimate human relationships as they have potential to help us reshape trauma. They act like a safe nest or can act like horror movies if our society doesn't catch up investing into protecting families' safety. Families aren't only about economic development, procreation, and fulfillment of our basic needs, but essentially, as Eastern spirituality teaches us, they help us to keep a container on safe and healthy development so our spiritual potential has matured. When baseline needs are met, we can seek and progress into other than passionate and ignorant modes of wars, pain, struggles, of survival and trauma. It is a development of our human potential into higher states of goodness beyond mating, eating, sleeping, and defending. Eastern spirituality calls for developing God-like nature or love of God. It starts when fight for survival ends. It comes about when we are given the opportunity to see the aim and end goal of our human potential. And so despite how much trauma can affect us, the most wonderful attribute of a human being and human community is its drive for potential. Its spirit that raises beyond passion and pain. Its drive for love, respect, and spiritual development. Its ability to serve, help, and care for others beyond one's country or culture. Start today. Reshape your conditioning by developing self-love. Drop words like should, guilt, deserving, blame, punishment, I'm not enough. I sincerely wish that you can transform your trauma and heal.